Good afternoon, everyone. If you could please give me your attention, we're going to make a couple of quick announcements and introductions here as we head into our lunchtime legislative panel discussion. Again, my name is Jeff. I'm really glad to be here. So grateful to have my colleagues, friends, advocates, and allies from across Pennsylvania here with us today. Really pleased to have with us, and I'm going to ask everybody to give a round of applause. We have a class here from Thiel College, came all the way from Western PA. Public policy students, welcome. Welcome the next generation of leaders. We are very pleased to have joining us again our friend Corinna Wilson. I'm going to introduce Corinna in just a second, but she is going to be moderating our panel discussion here today with some of our champions from the General Assembly of Pennsylvania. Again, we have folks watching online. We have a good number of folks here in the room, several dozen of us. We have equal numbers also online, and really excited about sharing these videos in the days ahead. Today, we're going to try something different because we are doing this for the first time as a hybrid event. I will note that we have been doing this budget summit annually for about 15 years, but this is the first time in 4 years we've been able to be together. About a week and a half before our 2020 summit was when everything kind of closed down with the pandemic. We've kept it going online, but we are really glad to be back in person. There's just something about being with other people and being able to have informal conversations that is really important to us. But we did want to also make this available for folks who couldn't make it here today. Folks in Erie have to travel 6 hours each way to be here. So we are glad to have folks in Erie with us online. The thing that we're going to do today is when we have an opportunity for you to submit questions, that you includes all of you here in the room. It also includes everyone who is online. You will all be able to submit questions the same way. If you look over here on the screen, for those of you in the room, and I think we have this projected, or will have it projected online here for folks on Zoom. The app that we will be using is Slido.com, S-L-I-D-O, Slido.com. You can do this from your laptop or from a phone. The code that you will need to enter to submit questions, I will read this out loud. It is also on the page here, and it's also online. The code is 310-64-73. Code to submit questions on Slido.com, 310-64-73. You'll be submitting those questions. Corinna will be reviewing those, grabbing those, and we'll be posing as many of those questions as possible before we wrap up this session at 1:15 today, and then head to our workshops. On that note, we are so pleased and have really been pleased for the last number of years as we've done this budget summit to be able to work with a really great leader here in Pennsylvania. We're pleased to have our friend Corinna Wilson, the president and founder of Wilson 500. Corinna has an extensive background in public policy, as well as public relations, communications, and she is also a licensed attorney here in Pennsylvania. Corinna brings her skills at really helping folks to think about and to come to consensus and come to meaningful answers to really tough questions. I'm really pleased to have with us today our friend Corinna Wilson. Corinna.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here, and it's so nice to see so many familiar faces, and very good to be back in person. Couple of housekeeping things before I introduce our panelists who you are here to see and talk to today. And I also want to thank PCN, because it's great to get this out across the Commonwealth. So thanks to my friends and colleagues at PCN. Really want to thank all the people in the audience for coming out. And then also our two panelists for coming on a non-session day. We really appreciate that. So you have the instructions for how to get onto Slido. So that's how you're going to ask questions. So hopefully, and I know you guys are always a great audience for questions, and I'm looking forward to asking them. I have a million, but I'd rather ask yours. So with that, I'd like to introduce Representative Chris Rabb and Representative Patty Kim. I'll start with Representative Kim. If you would take 3 minutes each, introduce yourselves, and then talk a little bit about what could Pennsylvania look like if policies that you're supporting and advocating for in Harrisburg were enacted. What does that look like?
Great. Thank you, Corinna. Thank you, Pennsylvania Budget Policy Center, for hosting us and asking my good friend Rabb and I to be here today. Again, my name is Patty Kim. You are sitting, for those here in person, you are sitting in my district, the 103rd Legislative District. I've been serving for this is my 6th term. Prior to this, I was on Harrisburg City Council for 7 years. And prior to that, I was working for the CBS affiliate as a news reporter and anchor. This is a new session and it feels very different. I am so grateful that we have a caring, thoughtful, and fierce leader as our speaker, Joanna McClinton. It's definitely different to be in the majority. I can firmly say it's better. We are in the room. We are actually at the decision-making table. We were pretty much ignored for me being in the minority for 10 years. So when we have a bill to introduce, it's most likely going to be considered, which is very new for us. I feel so embarrassed to say that, but we're in the room now. And what we bring in, I can confidently say that Representative Rabb and I agree that we are bringing in real people's issues, working people's issues, family issues, people who've been marginalized. We feel that it's time for real voices to be heard. Chris Rabb and I have been big proponents for increasing the minimum wage. When we look at workers, what do they need? It's not actually just the paycheck. It's making sure that they're supported, that they have good childcare, that they have reliable transportation, that they have paid sick leave, and on and on. We are going to make sure that our workers are taken care of in a holistic view versus a warm body in a factory. They make so much money, they should be fine. We're going to go deeper, folks, with our policies to make sure that we improve the quality of lives for our constituents and for people across Pennsylvania. So we're super excited. Our sleeves are rolled up. We're ready to go.
Hey, folks, State Representative Chris Rabb. I represent 65,000 souls in Northwest Philadelphia. No bragging rights. I represent the bluest dot in the entire state. This is my 4th term. And I agree with everything that Chairwoman Kim said. I think that's important to say. I think it's absolutely worthy of applause because she's not just a rank and file member like me. She's more on the fancy side of things because she's a majority chair of a standing committee, which means that she has the unilateral, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the unilateral authority to determine what bills that are referred to her committee she chooses to bring up for a vote. Is that fair?
That's correct.
So that's a huge deal because all majority chairs are Democrats. And while we're not here in a partisan, I don't think we're here in a partisan capacity. No, we're not. This is a new majority, which means that majority rules. So all majority chairs are Democrats. Patty Kim and I are Democrats. She runs the show in her committee. There's a minority chair, but that minority chair does not have anywhere near the power or authority to move legislation. So that means her agenda in her committee is our agenda as Democrats. And more importantly, to your point, it's about working people, right? Working families, folks who are on the margins often get overlooked or worse. And that has definitely changed the tenor of the work I do. I'll be honest, for the 6 years I've been in office, I would drive 104 miles from my home in Mount Airy to Harrisburg with a fair amount of dread. Because we did not have the institutional power to move the legislation we wanted, even to talk about the things we wanted, where it mattered most. There were times when there were certain terms we were not allowed to say on the House floor. There was a budget conversation, we were talking about the minimum wage, and the speaker at the time would not let us reference the term minimum wage. So this is a whole new way of being, and it feels like a new job. It's very disorienting in the best possible way.
So true.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to take moderator's privilege and ask Representative Kim to start with my first question. She's my state rep, so I get to ask my own rep a question. And that's really about the minimum wage work that you've been engaged in since you came to Harrisburg. Well, you're from Harrisburg, but since you came into office. Talk a little bit about what it looks like now.
Sure. So I have introduced a minimum wage bill for the last 10 years. And every year I've lost credibility. I'm like, we're closer, guys. We're a little bit closer. And they're like, whatever, Patty. But really, I think we're at the closest that we can be. We have a Republican senator from Erie County that has introduced a $15 minimum wage bill, which is very encouraging. I know that the vast majority of regular Pennsylvanians would like to see a pathway to $15 an hour. I think the percentage is like 73%. We have a real opportunity here. The hard work begins within our own caucus. We have a very diverse caucus, as you know. We have folks from the urban areas, suburban and rural areas. And we have to get all of us to go behind one bill because we are in a majority of 1+1. So we are working internally to figure out which we want. I want, he wants $15 an hour, but we have to make sure that all of our colleagues are comfortable with that. But we are moving forward. The speaker has said over and over again that this is one of our top priorities. So we know that we're going to have a bill and to vote on. But once we kick it out of the House, we have to have it in the Senate. And of course, the Republicans are in the majority there. So that's going to be something where they could water it down and bring it down lower than what we want it to be. But we keep saying that all states around Pennsylvania have a higher minimum wage, but I think we actually need to hear the actual dollar amount. So thanks to We the People for having this graphic readily available. But you know, Maryland has a $13.25 an hour minimum wage. Delaware has $11.75 minimum wage. New Jersey, $14.13. Connecticut, $14. Rhode Island, $13. Massachusetts, $15. New York City is at 15, above 15, but the rest of the state is at $14.20. Why not Pennsylvania? And what gets me so angry is that, you know, $15 an hour is double what it is now. If we had done the right thing, it wouldn't have such a large gap from $7.25 to $15 an hour. And thanks to the pandemic, which I hate saying out loud, thanks to the pandemic recession, our low wage workers' wages have gone up. They have gone up, which is a good thing, but we need to have policy to make sure that we lock it in place so that when we have a weak labor market, we don't go backwards. We got to lock in these wages. And so it is so important that we do that now, and we do that very soon. And it is so great to have Rep. Rabb working. We have Representative Ronnie Green helping us, and in the Senate, Senator Art Haywood has been a huge fighter for it. I want to give him credit, as well as Senator Tartaglia. So we are on it, and this is the year. I promise. This is the year, hopefully.
So I think it's really important to provide context for this beyond the 10 years that Rep. Kim has been promoting this. And like she said, there's a number of bills out there. I think Patty Kim, it should be Patty Kim's bill that runs. I have my own bill, but I would still want your bill. I do. And I think it's important for me to explain that. Any one of our bills, whatever it starts with, is not going to look like what ultimately is enacted into law, right? Because if it happens, it has to happen with a Republican-controlled Senate. The concern I have is how it gets watered down, who benefits, and who gets marginalized or remarginalized. So the historical context for the minimum wage is when it was created 75 years ago on the federal level, it started by marginalizing women and people of color. It did not include agricultural workers or domestic workers. Why? Because they didn't have the votes for it, because Southern Democrats were not going to support a minimum wage for people who they did not respect. Fast forward 75 years, we're going to be having a conversation to figure out who is worthy of being at the table and being respected. And we don't know how that's going to go, but as my mother likes to say, don't ask, don't get. And if you don't try, you have a 0% chance of getting what you want, right? But we want to start strong, which is why we have these array of bills. And they're all highly, highly overlapping. There are provisions of different bills that go in different directions. But one of the things that is often overlooked, not by Chairwoman Kim, but a lot of folks, is the tipped minimum wage. The tipped minimum wage in Pennsylvania is $2.83. So if you're a server, you get that plus tips, assuming your employer doesn't engage in wage theft. That's wrong. But here's the thing that is an important kind of way to process abolishing the tipped minimum wage and having one fair wage. And that is the origins of the tipped minimum wage come from Southern employers after slavery not wanting to pay Black workers. And so they said, you know, you can get tips, but we're not paying you. And that's why the United States is one of the only nations in the world that has such a tipping culture. It was born out of that racism. But that racism years and years ago negatively impacts white working class workers, predominantly white women, many of whom are single moms. So you can be a single mom in rural Pennsylvania who doesn't agree with anything that Democrats believe in, but you're a server and you're earning a tipped minimum wage. The reason you are getting paid a poverty wage is because of decisions made generations before to impact Black workers that now is impacting everybody. And that's a way to show that there is common cause among a wide array of people, not just one group, not just urban folk, not just Black folk, not just this folk, that folk, everybody. And when we dissolve the tip minimum wage and we increase the minimum wage towards a living wage, we'll be bringing what, over 1 million people out of poverty in Pennsylvania alone. And so we're giving a raise to all Pennsylvanians when you think about that. And for folks who are earning the minimum wage now, who get that raise, they spend that money, which is what Rev. Ken has talked about for 10 years. It's like, it's a reinvestment in local communities. They're not going to offshore accounts and tax havens and so forth. They're putting their money back into their own communities, into their own neighborhoods, which benefits everyone.
Thank you. I'll turn now to a subject that's near and dear to your heart, Representative Rabb. It's fair taxation. And I know you have a panel after lunch on this, so I don't want to steal your thunder, but could we tease it a little bit?
I'm for it.
That was about to happen.
No, it's real simple. It's that everyone, this is radical, but everyone should pay their fair share. That's it. Yeah, I think that's word of the law. It wasn't my idea, but it's everyone should pay their fair share. So you say, well, that's reasonable. Well, if you look at the tax code, there's no evidence of fairness. Well, if the wealthiest people in Pennsylvania have access to the politicians, to the lobbyists, and say, we're going to need you to cut us out here and do that, that's what happens over time. It's that corrosive influence of money in politics. And what we're seeking to do is just say, look, we can tweak things so that the majority of taxpayers don't increase their taxes. In fact, it will be decreased somewhat. A small percentage will have a little bit of a tax increase. And then the wealthiest just pay their fair share. So I'm not going to go into all the numbers and stuff, but the point is, not only it would be fairer, it will generate $2 to $6 billion of extra money that we can put into things we care about, things that you care about. It could be public education, environment, you name it. We're always looking for new ways to raise revenues without having to raise taxes on the middle class and working families. This is a way to do that. This does not hurt anyone who's middle class. This is really just leveling the playing field and creating revenue that a responsible legislature, and maybe one day we'll be have a responsible legislature, but invest that new money in ways that benefit communities across the state.
There's a quick follow-up and then I'll let you respond, Representative Kim. What about, this is from Slido, what about preemption? Can localities have the power to set wages appropriate for their own regions, areas?
Oh, so with regard to minimum wage,
Oh, I'm
yeah,
sorry.
yeah,
I'm sorry.
yeah, no, I mean, I'm sure there's folks who want to preempt taxes as well. I'll speak briefly and I will hand it over to Rep. Kim. So yes, you can have, we've had preemption where the state says, we believe in local control. And what I really mean is the conservatives who dominated the legislature said, we believe in local control unless you're from a city that we don't like. And if you're in a city we don't like, we don't want you to be able to raise the wage of workers. So we're going to keep you from doing that. Or we're going to keep you from doing what you feel is best as a municipality to protect your own citizenry from gun violence. Like, well, we believe in local control, but not if it involves dealing with common sense gun rights. So ideally, we also have in any bill, gosh, that would be great. If we ban preemption so that municipalities can decide what's best for them, like in New York, you said New York City, you know, has 15, the rest of the state, 14, you know, that type of thing. Like, if we believe in local control, we know what's best for our own community. What works in Philly may not work in Elk County, and that's okay. And that's the beauty of a commonwealth, right? But if you're saying, I believe in local control, I just don't, because of, you know, the demography of your community, I don't want you to have that power, I got a real issue with that. And that's essentially the subtext of the pushback, because if we're truly about local control, this would not be an issue.
Couple more follow-ups, one for you, Representative Kim. What is the, talk about the complicated interplay with other benefits that people could lose if the minimum wage goes up? How are you handling that?
So I think they're talking about the cliff benefits, and I am working with some nonprofits who are already doing that and helping folks once they get a raise that they may lose more benefits and they get less coming in, that we have a system in place where people can still stand on both feet even if they get, you know, a little bit more per hour. That's a real problem. But I think that if we do that holistic approach in terms of the childcare tax credits, what we had during the pandemic, where we had a lot of support for our low wage workers, is something that we can continue on. But again, you know, the other states, they don't see people falling off the cliff. People's quality of lives are better. That is something that we need to consider, but it's not going to be as drastic as people may think.
Another follow-up from Slido for Representative Rabb. You referenced wage theft. What can be done to fight that?
Oh, a lot can be done to address wage theft. Generally speaking, if things are cloaked in darkness and you're in power, you can get away with a lot of stuff, right? So if you put sunshine on something, you make it really harder for thievery to happen. Or if you do things that make it hard for theft to happen because things are digitized, and there is I just used two different, I was gonna say a paper trail, but you get a digital trail, right? If you have a trail to say, okay, this is what happened, this is how the money flowed, it's much harder to steal. And so what exists now is it errs to the benefit of employers and trusting them to do things. And there are better ways to work around that so that employers who operate in bad faith can't do that. These things were not envisioned when all this stuff began. And over time, organized workers said, here are appropriate ways to combat wage theft, et cetera, and even coming up with the term, because there's a lot of folks who don't even know what wage theft is. If you never had those type of jobs, you don't know those type of folks, you haven't had these conversations, you don't know that the money you've earned, you may not get access to. And all of that was a really important part of a number of these bills, as influenced by workers on the ground who said, here are specific ways we can address it.
And I'll just piggyback off what Rabb said, that Senator Tartaglione is really hot on this issue and really wants to protect workers. So in her bill, higher minimum wage bill, she has increased the penalties. She has said that, you know, if a worker files a lawsuit and wins, she doesn't have to pay the law fees, and there should not be any retaliation on the employee. So she's putting in a lot of supports to help the workers go after wage theft when it comes to the employers.
Great. Did you want to do any follow-up on the fair taxation subject?
What he said. Thank you.
My next question is about education funding in the wake of the William Penn School District case, and what you think is happening next, or what you'd like to see happen next with school funding. Representative Kim, do you want to go first?
Go ahead.
So the very conservative Commonwealth Court ruled that how we do things is unconstitutional. A lot of folks were like, duh. Like, why we need to wait this long for something so obvious? But it needed the affirmation of an independent judiciary to say that it was unconstitutional, right? I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a constitutional law scholar, but I know right from wrong. The bottom line was, they said it's unconstitutional, and it is the authority, it is the responsibility of the legislature to define it in ways to make it constitutional. What thorough and efficient means, which we like to say full and fair. Full and fair, right? However much money we've been giving to the schools, it ain't enough. It ain't full. And how we decide how much each of the 500 different school districts get is not fair. You can't give the same dollar amount to 500 very different school districts. I'm in a school district with 200,000 kids. There are school districts that have 1,000 kids. You're not going to give them cut them the same check. Also, the needs of the children are different. If you're in a district where the majority of folks are speaking English as a second language, they're going to have different needs. And that's okay. That's what we call equity, right? What does fairness look like? So we had in 2015 a unanimous bipartisan conclusion from the Basic Education Funding Commission that said, this is what fairness looks like. They didn't talk about what adequate looked like, what full funding looked like. We need to do both full and fair. The political pushback has been, we don't have the money for that. Like, if we really fully funded these schools, like, where's this money coming from? Because we're not going to raise taxes, God forbid, not even on the super rich who wouldn't even notice. Like, we don't have the money for it. And if we do it right, some of the schools get more than their fair share, even though the ones who get more than their fair share don't get enough. Does that make sense? It's a little, let me explain it this way. We have a pie, and we cut it up into 500 pieces. And you would think the biggest pieces would go to the biggest school districts. Not necessarily. The problem is, even though if we equitably sliced up that pie is not nearly big enough. We need to bake a bigger pie. That requires more money, more public money to do that. And there's not a will to go back to your district and say, oh, do you mind if I raise your taxes significantly? Not many people are going to say yes. So there need to be other ways to make that happen. But the bottom line is, we are not educating our children as well as we should, and it is our moral and practical responsibility to do so. Right? That's basically what they, right? Now this court decision says, y'all haven't done your job as a legislature. do better. And now it's up to us in a slim Democratic majority in the House and a conservative domination in the Senate to figure out what that looks like. And it's going to be some heavy, but I can say this. Of all the rallies that come to Harrisburg, that fill up the entire rotunda, there's only been a few where I've seen it's just been massive. Like gun rights has been one of them. Environmental climate action has been another, but one that has brought out the most amazing diversity of humanity from across the state has been full and fair funding of our public schools. And this will not happen without grassroots support. And your ability to organize, and all of you online, your ability to organize and positively influence both houses is not just important, it is essential, because you all can have a more powerful impact on some of our colleagues who are not quite on the right side than we can as colleagues.
Housekeeping. Representative Kim, would you mind sharing the mic? Yours is not projecting adequately.
So I just want to give a little bit of historical perspective when it comes to funding public education. 90% of Pennsylvanians, children, students go to a public school. And because we have not for decades adequately funded our public schools, things have been deteriorating, whether it be the buildings to the resources. When we don't fully fund them, school districts get desperate. They look at the public school code that was written back in 1979, 1969, and it says, oh, kindergarten isn't required. We're going to go half-day kindergarten. Oh, we don't have to drive this kid to a school because he lives less than 1.5 million miles away. So they start chipping at the actual quality of education. And then now we have parents who are unhappy with the public schools and who are looking for alternatives, maybe a charter school, maybe a cyber charter school. And then the cyber charter schools are like, see, they need us. And then public schools have to reimburse every child that opts out of the school district. So we're in a vicious cycle. We're not adequately funding them. The quality of education goes down. People look elsewhere, and school districts are having a hard time. And I hear from the other side, per student, we pay more than the average. Okay, guys, you flat fund us while special education students increase. Public schools have to accept all special education students. And sometimes they pay maybe $100,000 per student because you need an aid, you need a wheelchair, you need all the accommodations. That's fine. It's expensive. Transportation has gone up. The reimbursement for cyber charter school have gone up. So, and then we cut plan cons, so we don't have the funds to help maintain our school buildings. I don't like what the other side is saying. It is ruining the quality of our public schools. And then the teachers don't have the support. Some of them are not paid well. You think this, you ask students, I ask my own kids, do you want to be a teacher? No way, they don't get paid enough. I'm like, these kids know how much the teachers get to have like around their neck. Like I get paid $41,000 a year. And the teachers are not even encouraging other people. We have a problem in our public schools, folks, and charter schools and private schools are not the answer. That is only a small percentage. When people are drowning, I want to help the mass, and those are the kids in public schools. So do not think about that we're paying too much. It only goes to greedy teachers. Absolutely wrong. We need to have real investment because we're not competing with each other. We're competing with people in South Korea. We're competing with people in India. We are behind, and we need to show real investment.
I just found out a school walking distance from my district office has asbestos. Damaged asbestos. 2023, in the richest country in world history, we got kids and teachers, administrators, parents in an environment with asbestos. how is this acceptable for anyone? I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy. And we're finding more and more schools are uncovering this. I'm 53 years old. I'm Gen X. Does anyone remember lead gas? Anyone remember you had a choice, leaded or unleaded? What do you want, lead or unleaded? What? Like, there was lead in the gas, or lead paint. You still have lead paint. That's absurd. So we're dealing with the legacy of people not putting into practice policies that keep folks safe. Often folks were in the margins, right? Because you're not going to see these things in the wealthiest schools. And what the Commonwealth Court was saying was that there are essentially two different tracks. It's the haves and the have-nots. And again, the Commonwealth Court is a conservative court. For them to render this decision is huge. It's an affirmation of what many people have known for years, but it's an important official affirmation that should light a fire under the legislature to do the right thing. The question is, will we collectively have the political will to do so? And you know what helps inform the political will of politicians and that subset of elected officials who are public servants like Representative Kim and myself is hearing the hue and cry from the people, bringing your pitchforks and demanding something. Because I assure you, if folks remain quiet, people will continue to be complicit in making sure this system remains because they don't want to shake up the apple cart. And that's an important encouragement for all of you to say, how can I help those folks who are in elective office do the right thing? Because we can never do it alone. And when we're at our best, it's because we have been inspired by the people we represent. It's not because we come up with all the ideas. We are inspired by those folks who are on the front lines, who are telling us what we need to do. And then when we join forces in what we call co-governance, amazing things happen. And just as a quick example of that, back in 2020, when tens of thousands of people of all backgrounds came out after the killings of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, 66 of 67 counties had peaceful demonstrations around police accountability and racial justice. Everywhere, there were all white protests in support of racial justice. All over the Commonwealth. It was because of those tens of thousands of Pennsylvanians that came out that inspired us in the House of Representatives to take over the House and demand immediate legislative action around police accountability. And within 36 days, we got 3 bills enacted into law with unanimous support. And I am applauding all of you who are out there peacefully demonstrating, embracing your First Amendment rights, saying this is not right, we demand more, and the subset of us in the legislature who listened and did what we were supposed to do. It's a two-way street here. So whatever things we may inspire you to do or think about in this panel, what you all do to inspire us is probably so much more.
I love what you said, that just empowering the people. Like when I was sitting in the House after George Floyd's death and all that, like I felt the pressure in this massive Capitol building. Like we have to do something. They are crying out for change. And it was because the real people out on the streets telling us what to do. And it was amazing what Rabb did and the others, but real change happened so quickly because of you guys. It's really cool.
Great, our Slido questions are heating up, so thank you. We've seen bipartisan support for corporate tax cuts in recent years. Will House Democrats stand against these kinds of new cuts and for raising corporate tax rate?
Yeah. All right, so I wanna say something. When the pandemic happened, we allowed for remote voting. And sometimes communication less than great. And so I was voted for increasing the corporate net income tax. No, decreasing it. I apologize, decreasing it, which I strongly opposed. So I'm on record as having voted for reducing corporate net income tax. I strongly opposed it, and it's documented somewhere that no one will ever read. The journal somewhere saying that that was a mistake. So I'm one of the legislators who strongly opposes reducing the corporate net income tax. I feel very strongly about that. And this transcends partisanship. So this is not Democrat versus Republican. This is an ideological difference that is worthy of deeper discussion within House Democratic Caucus and the other three caucuses. But, you know, like I said, you asked about tax fairness. I want to take care of working families first. That's my priority. Corporations, they got enough lobbyists and support to get what they want. They're not going to get my time the way the communities that Rep. Kim and I feel very strongly about. And we need 102 votes for that to happen. We hope there will be 102 Democrats on May 16th. If we remain in the majority, they're going to need every single Democrat to support that. Well, maybe not, because there will be Republicans who support it. There's always a negotiation between the caucuses about how many votes will your caucus put up and how many will the other caucus put up in the House. If there is a request by leadership to have unanimity and have all Democrats, they will be sorely disappointed. There's a larger contingent of House Democrats, particularly with the 29 new members who are Democrats, who I don't believe will have the appetite to support that. And so we have to expand the narrative about what are our priorities as it relates to tax reform and who gets the benefits and who's at the front of the line. And for me, working families are at the front of the line.
Chris said something that has reminded me that our majority can be temporary. And that's a scary thought. And so I don't want to get too comfortable sitting back like I'm majority chair of the Aging and Older Adult Services. I think all of us have to be engaged. If you like our priorities, if you like and believe what we're fighting for, we all have to stay engaged and not get comfortable, folks, because it can change and can change next month in a heartbeat. So please stay engaged and be supportive where you can, because I don't want to be a temporary majority caucus.
Another question from online. Could you see a day when Pennsylvania could create a single application for people to use in applying for public support? You know, simplify the administrative burden on people seeking.
So I think Governor Shapiro is on the right track in trying to streamline the red tape to government and filling out applications and making it a lot easier for folks applying for whatever DP permit or a nursing license. So I think he's definitely on the right track and hopefully will follow through.
And on a related point with regard to forms and such, not just simplifying, but modernizing some of these forms. There's a form I ran across when I was working on gun legislation, where if you want to be a federally licensed gun dealer, on the form, it's just one page. One of the last questions is, are you a drunkard? Is that a trick question? And there was no definition of drunkard. So some of the things we have to do is to actually look at the things that currently exist and say, should that remain? Do we need that form? Should we modernize that question? I mean, all of these things are legacies. For every time we introduce a bill and enact something, there are 10 other things that exist that are arcane. language that if you came across, you would find ridiculously offensive. There are laws on the books that talk about, like, I think we had a bill to allow people to play baseball on the Sabbath. I think that was something that came across. That was there, you know, like, there are all kinds of things. So when we talk about government and improving how we access government services and such, one of the things we have to do is take a look at what currently exists and how we need to overhaul these things and apply some innovative approaches to doing so.
There's a question on youth employment. Will Pennsylvania resist the lead of some other states that are reducing protection for child labor?
Well, I'm personally for child labor as it relates on the campaign side. I've had my children. It is my children. I've taken neighbors' children's too. Children's, that's the ultra plural. No, that it's horrendous what folks are talking about. And it goes to this narrative of pro-life. I'm pro-life because I believe in ending poverty and expanding justice and providing services to the folks who are most needy. I'm pro-life. There are folks who are just pro-birth, but once those babies are born, those children may not matter, and they can be used in service of businesses that want to exploit their labor. We had this conversation already 100 years ago. And we're bringing it up now because there is an appetite for exploitation that we must not allow.
The clock is ticking down here, and we have so many important topics that matter a lot, I'm sure, to people attending. And so I'm gonna let you pick. We have election security. There's a bill that just passed out of committee, enhancing some election security measures, expanding the right of access. There's LGBTQ plus protections that are on the move, and particularly in your caucus. And there's some housing bills and housing advocacy going on. So do you want to pick? I don't want to leave things off the table that you care about.
A lot of good ones. So I just want to circle back to where we started. These are issues that are incredibly important to my constituents and for a lot of folks in Pennsylvania. That we're going to take a deep dive on how do we really improve the quality of lives of other people. You know, sorry to talk about the minimum wage again, but you know, it took us so long to realize that minimum wage workers were struggling because we have looked at small business owners who are the backbone of our economy, but we gave them so much benefit of the doubt that they will do what's right. And there are a number of folks, I've seen franchise businesses who've taken advantage of our workers. And we asked them to come out and testify, and they can't afford to. They can't afford to come out to the Capitol, pay for parking, and to testify their struggles. So our ears are to the ground to hear what people are really struggling with, where they don't have a high paid lobbyist to speak for them. And so we are going to be fighting for all of those issues to help increase the quality of lives for folks, whether it be LGBTQ plus folks, or people who are living in rundown homes with terrible landlords who are taking advantage of our renters. We are going to do a deep dive and make sure. And I don't know if our time is limited in the majority, but we're going to go hard on what we can do. And we know that we have to reach across the aisle on some issues to make sure that can happen. So again, we're ready to go.
I had the great fortune of being among the 12 members of the Judiciary Committee that supported the Fairness Act, which extended protections to our queer Pennsylvanians. And then the fact that I've lost track. Yesterday. In committee, yeah, that's right. And that was huge because folks have been working on it before we even had openly gay members of the legislature. 20 years. We had a straight guy promoting this until we had openly gay members to speak on their own behalf. Now we have 6, all in the House of Representatives. So it's progress matters, even if we don't get to it this year, even if we don't win this year, we're moving in the right direction. We're not going backwards. That's number one. But I want to mention another issue that is particularly relevant to young people, because when I start, most young people have no idea what a state, in fact, most adults don't know what state lawmakers do, frankly. And I said, what do you care about? And if someone says, I'm concerned about LGBTQ rights, I say, well, do you know that if you live in Philly, you have protection, but if you come visit me in Harrisburg and you stop somewhere between the wrong town, between Philly and Harrisburg, you can be denied service because of your sexual orientation or perceived sexual orientation. You could be fired. You can legally get married to someone of the same gender on Saturday, show up to work with your picture after your honeymoon on your desk, and your boss said, what's that? So, oh, that's my husband. You're like, you're a man. Like, yeah, you're fired. That's legal in Pennsylvania. And it freaks out young people that they are in a state where there is a second-class citizenry. But there's another issue that impacts everyone with particular interest towards young people, and that's weed. So we have medical cannabis, but most people who have a driver's license, so if you use cannabis and you have a driver's license, raise your hand. All right, I will raise my hand. I'm a medical cannabis patient. I've been driving for many years. I have cannabis in my system right now because it lasts for at least 30 days, but I'm never high. But law enforcement has been trained to say that I'm a threat, even if I'm never impaired. And so there are 800,000 Pennsylvanians who have a medical cannabis card like I do, who have no idea that they are at risk every time they get behind the wheel, not because they're impaired, but because law enforcement deems them as a threat, because when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So I'm working on reintroducing a bill with a Republican counterpart to remove that, that burden so that people will not have to have that type of fear. And it also relates to law-abiding gun owners. You can't be a medical cannabis patient. Or if you're a tenant, if you want to rent an apartment, you can be kicked out because you're a medical cannabis patient, even if you're not filling the room with smoke. So there are all these things that impact folks in different ways that people are not aware of. But once you know, you know. And these are sometimes the small things that could actually get bipartisan support to materially change the lives of many people who have been put through the criminal legal system unnecessarily.
Thank you so much. Please join me in thanking Representative. I also want to shout out to the Thiel College students here today. I hope you're getting more excited about getting involved and see how accessible it really can be to become an advocate and to weigh in on issues of public policy. It's critical. And you are, in fact, our future. So stick with it. And I want to thank the folks from PVPC, also Steve and Mark and Jeff and Levana, Adrian, Kristen, everybody who's made this conference great. Thank you so much for coming. Thanks to everybody participating on Zoom. Thanks to PCN, as always, for coming out and supporting this as well. And I'm going to turn the microphone over to Steve. Thanks so much and have a great rest of the night.
So that was wonderful. Thank you so much, Corinna, and thank you so much, Representatives Kim and Chris Rabb. This session is always the highlight of the budget summit, and that was true again today. I also want to thank some other folks. I want to thank the hotel staff. I don't know about you, but I overate big time. So the chef and the whole team did a magnificent job. So we appreciate that very much. I do want to thank again, even though it pains me to do so, Jeff Garris. Jeff shared with me yesterday that more than any other boss in his experience, I direct profanity in his direction. I explained to him, since I'm English, lived in England till I was 11, from the north of England, Manchester. They said that's how he knows I love him. I also want to thank Jay Grandis, our new office manager, who's filling a very large shoes of Stephanie Frank in the organizing of this event and doing so admirably. Stephanie was stolen by Kadita Kenner, who was stolen by John Hanger. But we don't hold any grudges. No, we actually don't hold grudges. When people leave us to go on to do bigger and better things, we regard that as very much to our credit and a great success. And Kadita, Pennsylvania Stacey Abrams is doing remarkable work at the New Pennsylvania project. You're connected to that too, right? So you're partly responsible for students. Okay. Should I use that joke? No, that won't. I have a little inside joke going with Representative Kim. Okay, but I won't share it. In deference to him. In deference, although it's really hard. Not to. I also want to thank, in terms of the triad of folks who kind of were the lead for us in pulling off this event, Adrian Stanley, our Deputy Director of Communication. Who's right there, holding her knee. Had lead responsibility for making this hybrid event work out for both in-person and digital attendees. And I'm going to go through on the rest of the team. So let's, folks should sort of stand up so we can see them. And then at the end, maybe give them a round of applause. Ali Feldman, the organizing associate for the Pennsylvania Budget and Policy Center. Erica Friedman, who I don't think is here, but our Deputy Director of Communications. Claire Kovach, the Senior Research Analyst at PISO Research Center, and our minimum wage expert, and sure to be Representative Kim's best friend in the next few months. Lavana Landecker, our Associate Director. Let's see, Mason Murtaza, our Research Associate. Diana Colson, my colleague that you heard from before. Vivian Sinagra, our organizing associate with PBPC. Kirsten Snow, our communications director. And Thando Thandewi, who's the embodiment of the Pittsburgh Budget and Policy Center. And last but by no means least, I want to thank the tireless, passionate, selfless, and upbeat Susan Spicker, who's the executive director of Voters of PA, and her growing team, Sandra Miller and Katja Krieger. I mean, they really are an example for all of us in terms of their commitment to the team effort and their not caring tuppence about getting the credit or the accolades, just being mission driven. So good for them. And let's give all of them a round of applause again. And now Jeff has some final instructions.
All right, thank you, Steve. And thank you, everybody, for being here. I'm sorry, this is a little odd, but I'm going to ask you to do this. I want to take a selfie to send to my mom of everybody here. So everybody wave to my mom. Hey, Mom. So thank you for indulging. We'll wait 10 years to do that. Whew, seniority. So let's talk about what's coming up. Our final session of our budget summit for 2023 is about to begin. We're scheduled to begin that in about 5 to 10 minutes. These will be in the breakout rooms. You've heard about some of these topics just now from Rep. Rabb and Rep. Kim. One of the workshops, this one is going to be streamed for those of you who are watching online on Zoom. It is towards a higher education system that works. That will be in Pennsylvania D, all the way down at the far corner there. We have a second workshop, which is Reimagine Pennsylvania, leveraging federal money to create good union jobs, equity, and advance climate action. That will be in Pennsylvania Room C. And our third and final workshop of the day will be Tax the Ultra Rich Now. Tax the ultra rich now, always a crowd pleaser, federal, state, and local efforts to make billionaires and corporations pay their fair share. We're really looking forward to looking at some of the exciting work that's going on here in Pennsylvania. Those are our workshops this afternoon. They will begin, like I said, in about 10 minutes. The goal is to wrap these up between about 2:45 and 3. That will be the final session. So when you come out of the workshops, you can gather your things, maybe stop by the registration table to say goodbye, and we encourage folks to get on their way after that. Again, thank you to everybody. Thank you so much to Steve Herzenberg. Again, thank you to Corinna Wilson. Thank you to Rep. Chris Rabb, and thank you to Rep. Patty Kim. Thanks, everybody. Have a great afternoon.